right, so this is what we call the afterburn, which is hard to do when the temperature in here is about 40. We could use an afterburn. I don't mind it too much. It's just a little colder than I would like, but I know it's cold. So here's the afterburns. This is where we get to have comments and questions about the teaching. If you've got comments or questions, go ahead and raise your hand. Steve Waffle will bring around the mic. Sounds like the air finally turned off. That's good. Yay, we can applaud for that. Some of you are still wearing your jackets even though you're inside. I can understand that. Some of you brought blankets. I understand that too. And you're looking at me going, how do you still wear short sleeves? Because actually, I don't mind this so much. But I could see the rest of you chattering your teeth. Okay. Anyway, all right, so Steve's going to start us off. Go ahead.
Okay. All righty. When you mentioned Psalms 107, verses 10 through 11, my question is, can this apply to us in our mentor relationship? Because if we refuse and circumvent leadership, don't we sit in darkness?
Yes. Look, here's the problem. The problem is we don't have anybody well, I guess it didn't even matter then. But as I say, we don't have anybody as open and obvious as like a Moses. But of course, they didn't hear Yahweh talking to Moses. Moses just said Yahweh was talking to him. But I mean, they had to believe and trust that Yahweh was talking to Moses. Okay? And so, but even though they had somebody as open and obvious, they didn't listen to him anyway. Same thing happened with Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and the rest of the prophets, and even Yeshua. People generally didn't listen. But, that's why I keep saying over and over again, you need to find and prayerfully ask Abba to lead you to whoever it is he's speaking through. Because if Paul is to be believed, and I know a lot of people don't like Paul, don't listen to him at all, but if you are someone who will embrace that Paul is supposed to be in your Bible and has something to say, Paul tells you that the fivefold guys, the apostles, evangelists, teachers, shepherds, and what did I miss? I left somebody out. Prophets, okay, are there for you until, and we haven't reached the until. So it would seem that we need to find them. And then once we find them, as Steve was pointing out, then we need to treat them in a Deuteronomy 17 kind of way. Okay, nowhere in Deuteronomy 17, by the way, does it say that the leaders who are making decisions will never make a bad one, that they'll be perfect always. But we're learning to trust the Creator and His structure and the way He does things. And that trust, is hard for us to develop, and that's really the problem. Because if anything doesn't go perfect 100% of the time, we figure, well, then we're in the wrong place. That's not necessarily true. But of course, there are times when you're going to realize you are in the wrong place, and you have to figure out, how do I know the difference between an imperfect place I'm supposed to be in and an imperfect place that's the wrong place? That's part of what the Ruach is for. But you also have to make sure you're getting your preferences out of it. Oh, but I don't like him. Oh, I don't like that, and I don't like this. Well, just make sure it's not an I don't like, okay? When you start off with any kind of I don't like preference, or I like and this one's not allowing it or whatever, then you're getting too you involved. Okay, who's next?
All right, from Olivia and Janet Hoffman. It says, Dear Rabbi, in Psalm 119, 130, aside from studying Torah, would you recommend any additional study from Haftarah or Brit? And if so, how should we go about studying and meditating in the word/light?
Okay, so verse 130 says, the opening of your words, up of your words gives light. Now, nowhere in that verse is it saying just to read the Torah portion. It's the word all the way through to Revelation. It's Genesis to the end of the book. It's Yeshua himself as the word bringing light. And so you need to study it all. Okay, but that's where it also helps to have a teacher who pieces the whole book together on different topics. This is why we do the topical teachings on Shabbat and not the Torah portion. We do that on Tuesdays, because when I have a bigger audience with more of you available, I want to show you a topic from Genesis to Revelation and what the book says completely about that topic. That's the kind of studying. The opening up of your words gives light, not if you just look at it in one little isolated, zoomed in little spot. To understand darkness and light, we've already covered from Genesis to Psalms and to Proverbs. That's a lot to cover. I mean, we covered an awful lot of sections just to understand light, and we have not yet gone through, after we finish Proverbs, we're going to Matthew and into the New Testament. So we covered the prophets, we covered the Chumash, the Torah, the first 5 books, the prophets, and now the writings we're covering. The only way you're going to get a full understanding is to get a full understanding. I hate to be profound. Okay? All right, so hopefully that answers your question, Janet. The opening up the word has to do with, you have to open it up, and it's a puzzle. You must piece the puzzle together. Okay? By the way, I didn't get to say this, I'll say it now in the Afterburn, and you guys need to know this. The MTOI Academy, older class, I don't know what age we started it at, but they went through the Fear of Yahweh teaching and made PowerPoint presentations and did a fabulous job with it, and were able to articulate very clearly in a way that made it clear to me that they understood what the teaching said. So they did a great job. And I'm looking now. That puts the pressure on the ones I didn't see yet that you're doing on Monday. So the rest of you, pressure's on. Okay, because I only got to see 3 of the 6 presentations or whatever, so the rest of them I'll see on Monday. But great job, because that's part of what we're talking about here, is that we want the youth to be able to understand. Now, basically, remember, they listened to a 7-part teaching, and in going through it, they went all the way through the scriptures on everything that I chose to put in it anyway that had to do with fear. And we're able to then express an understanding about the fear of Yahweh and what it means and how it handles our being afraid of anything else. And so that only occurred to me because that's what Janet's asking. The opening up of the word comes from piecing the puzzle together. Okay? Your Bible is thousands of puzzles in one book. And you can grab pieces of it to make different parts of it come to life as a full picture. And in this case, we're looking at darkness and light. Other times we looked at covenant, or we looked at salvation or grace or kashrut or whatever it is, but you have to go and pull all the pieces of that puzzle together, and then it opens up and gives light. That's a lot of work, by the way, which is something we should not be intimidated or afraid of. All right, next question.
From Nessa Makes says, actually, I'm going to go to Jonathan Thompson. He has one on 119. Says, can we expect and connect to light via Psalm 119, verse 130, and Proverbs 2, 122, with the 4 levels of understanding, the Peshat, Remez, Drosh, and Shod, through and under vertically aligned structure, leadership, and teaching?
Okay, the answer is yes, but I want to just say that you don't always need more than just the Peshat and probably the Remez understanding, okay? Because the Peshat is the simple understanding. Okay, for those of you that don't know, the Jews have, in the studying of this for thousands of years, have come up with the idea that Scripture generally is written on at least 4 levels, and the 4 levels being Peshat, Remez, Drosh, and Sod, and Peshat being the simple, basic, straightforward understanding. You see this in Yeshua saying, you've heard of old not to murder. That's Peshat. I didn't murder anybody. He says, but there's a hint here as well. The hint is that also, if you're hating your brother, this is a problem. Okay? So there's more to it than just the simple Peshat level. Peshat level of adultery. Either you slept with her or you didn't, or you slept with him or you didn't. That's adultery. But he said, no, it hints that there's more to it. The more full understanding is that you shouldn't even be desiring to do it. You shouldn't be lusting after. Okay, so I would say that you need at least those two. The allegorical also, a lot of stuff is taught in parables and stories, and you need to understand what it's trying to say. The hidden can get you in trouble. Don't worry about the hidden so much. He might reveal to you an insight or something, and that's really exciting through the anointed, appointed, or even directly to yourself. But we don't need to find 4 levels on everything. Let's at least try to understand it on the very simple Peshat level. And then let's call it the fullness of the intent level. Let's not try to stick ourselves to the Pardes or the Peshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod, but at least understand the fullness of what he intended. He intended us not to murder anybody, but he also intended us not to hate our brothers. He intended us not to commit adultery, but he intended us not to even lust after somebody, even though you didn't actually commit the act. So let's look at it from the point of what literally did he say? And what was the fullness of what he intended by what he wanted us to understand. Okay, Jonathan, hopefully that helps you there. And yes, we then have the help of anointed appointeds to understand that. I think it was the rest of what you said.
Okay, from Nessa Makes, says, question, does Proverbs 2:12 through 15 relate to the scripture in Galatians 1:8 about a quote unquote, a different gospel? Is that what a different gospel means?
Proverbs 2 with Galatians. I'll have to say yes, but let me see if I can qualify it. In other words, anything that is gospel is something that is. It's a good news that Paul was referring to. And if you take the thing that is, and you bend it, twist it, or alter it from what it actually was supposed to be, originally intended, then you are perverting it or twisting it like in Proverbs. So I would say yes. Okay?
From Olivier and Janet Hoffman, says, Rabbi, Proverbs 4:17, would you please elaborate on this verse? What does it mean, bread of wrongdoing and wine of violence?
Well, I mean, what do you normally think of when you talk about bread and wine? Okay, you think about a meal. You think about eating of these things. Man does not live on bread alone. And so what he's saying is here is in verse 17, for they have eaten the bread of wrongdoing, they drank the wine of violence. Okay, so they're feeding on wrongdoing, as that's where they're getting their sustenance from. That's their life, their input. They're inputting, and so what do you get? You're going to get whatever you put in, you're going to garbage in, garbage out, right? So they're feeding on wrongdoing, so obviously wrongdoing is going to come out. Now the wine part could have to do with joy. Wine and joy go together, and so they take joy or pleasure in doing violence or doing wrong. Now when I say violence, it also could be violence to the word. We see this in Ezekiel 22 when he says they have done violence to my teachings. Okay? And so wine has to do with having joy in it. So here they're sustaining themselves on, they're feeding on the wrongdoing, and they're also taking joy in it. Hopefully that answers the question. And again, that's if you study the word and let the word open up, you see how the word bread is used throughout the word, the word wine is used throughout the word, and you can see what they generally are used as metaphors or idioms for to make the point of sustaining life. Bread sustains life. You feed on bread, you eat bread, and that brings life, right? We need that to sustain our beings. Of course, then we're told that you can't live on bread alone, but we need every word that comes out of Yahweh's mouth. But also, wine is then linked to rejoicing and joy. So my guess would be that they're feeding on wrongdoing and they're rejoicing in the violence.
From Chris Zimmerman, or from Anna, says, looking at Psalms 82:5, how do we know if we are walking in darkness? And is it up to us to vet that out ourselves or up to Abba to reveal?
Okay, thank you, Anna. Good question. Look, these things are not, I was going to say not black and white, like darkness and light, but it's not a cut and dry thing. It's not clear that it's only done one way. In other words, Abba may reveal to you that you've been walking in darkness. That's what happened when he popped your bubble and showed you that you didn't need to be doing Sunday, Christmas, and Easter, or whatever it was that he showed you first. So some of it's going to come from him, but it didn't come from him where you woke up one day and had it put in your head. He led you to something where he showed you something and you looked up something or you watched something. So he's going to use others to bring these things to light when you're ready to receive them. Okay, now as far as what Anna's asking, for those of you that are at this point where you are now, you need to have those in the vertical alignment, those of the anointed appointed, to help you with the rest of it. Who you can ask a question, hey, is this light or darkness? Should I be doing this or not be doing this? That's really what you ask when you ask halakhic questions. You're asking light and darkness questions. Is this the right thing to do? Yes or no? Is it light or darkness? Is this the right thing to do? Yes or no? Is it light or darkness? And that's why we have some of the Marco Polo groups where you can ask halakhic questions, because you have questions about what will lead you towards light and what will lead you towards darkness. Okay, next question.
From Olivia and Janet Hoffman. Rabbi, Proverbs 4:24, are a crooked mouth and perverse lips only related to Lashon Hara? Does this also include speaking in anger? And what else does this include?
No, in this particular case, it's talking about those that would be telling you that, what is wrong is right, or taking what is right and twisting it to make it not be exactly. This is not about Lashon Hara. This is not about speaking evil of somebody. It's talking about in here the idea of the path. And there are those that would lead you down a path. Remember, because verse 26 talks about consider the path of your feet. And it says, in verse 25, let your eyes look forward, focus on. So the crooked and perverse is trying to get you to go zigzagging off the path. So this isn't about Lashon Hara. This isn't about, saying things about people in this particular case. This is about those that would try to convince you that going over there, left or right, is going to be just fine, safe, or wonderful, or lead you to where you want to go when it won't.
Okay, from Steve. This is a general question. How do we explain to someone that all the times Yahweh says to guard his commands, it does not just mean the 10 commandments only? Okay,
so your challenge is letting go. It's not your job, it's not your problem to argue or explain to anybody anything. You can't make that argument and win it. When Yeshua says, if you love me, guard my commands, people are going to think it's only the letters in red in their New Testament part of their Bible. You can't argue that. You can't win that argument. So when someone says to you, well, guard the commands only means the 10 commandments, well, then test them on it and say, well, are you keeping the fourth one? But it's not an argument you're going to win, because they're not keeping the fourth one. So if they're even going to make that argument, they're not even doing that. But that's not going to get anywhere. You're not going to win. So the point is, don't get involved in those. Look, Titus 3 says, and I think in verse 9 or 10 it says, avoid these useless quarrels and genealogies and arguments over Torah. They're fruitless. They're useless. They're not going to get anywhere. The person who's asked this question is doing what all of us have tried at some point, which is to talk to our friends and convince them that guarding the commands means more than the 10 commandments. It means all of the Torah. And has any of you ever won that argument? No. So, do you remember the movie War Games? The only way to win is not to fight. Okay? The computer had to figure that out when it came to nuclear war. You need to recognize that reality. There is no formula I can give you that will convince anybody that guarding the commands means more than the 10. I can't even convince them to do all the 10 as part of guarding the commands, because they won't see that Sunday is not the fourth commandment. And so the answer is no, there's no way to do that. Just don't be, what's the word I'm looking for? You need to allow that to be not your problem. Okay? It's Yahweh level problem, not a you level problem. None comes lest the Father draws, period. You don't get to do the drawing. You can't open up their eyes. You can't open up their ears. You can't do any of those things. None can come unless the Father does it. You need to stop doing that. Okay? That make sense? I know that's frustrating because I should be talking this way instead of that way, but because you want everybody to see what you see. I get that. We talked about that today. I mean, we're always happy when everybody's on the same page. But we're not. And that's not your fault. And you got to let go of the Christian mindset, because Christianity told you that people are not getting where they need to go because you're not telling them. And that's just a lie. Nobody's not going to get where they're supposed to go because you didn't tell them. If Abba could tell the Israelites through Moses, hey, I could just raise up rocks. We could do this. I could start again with Moses. I mean, I don't need, we can start with anything. Do you think that Abba's will is not going to get done because you dropped the ball? I thought Abba was smart. So you think he depends on us for anything? He's not depending on you for anything except you to do what he called you to do in your walk. He's expecting you to own your path. Everybody else's path, he's got that under control. And if somebody gets led to you, remember the words of Mordecai to Esther. If you don't step up, he'll just find somebody else. So if you drop the ball, that's okay. That won't do you any good, but it's not going to hurt the other person. He'll find somebody he'll lead them to where they'll get what they need. Okay? So don't have that pressure. That's where this question comes from, is thinking it's my job, it's my pressure to reveal something or convince something, and you can't. But the other thing is you can't resist the fight and the argument when they try to poke at you. Don't let them poke at you. Just say, I don't want to argue with you. You believe what you believe, that's fine. I believe what I believe. We're all walking out our own salvation, fear and trembling. Let's talk about something else. Surely there's other things to talk about, because I'm assuming you talked about other things before the argument started. Okay? But you know they're not going to be happy, and you know they're going to be uncomfortable with your choice to walk this path. And so once you chose to walk this path, they now want to poke at you because they want to convince you that you're wrong and you don't need to go in that direction. And so what is the odds that they're going to convince you? Hopefully 0. Now, of course, if you're brand new and you're part of the rocky ground or one of the other ground other than the good ground, from the parable of the sower, they might blow you right out. That does happen. We've seen it. You've seen it if you know enough people. They get all excited and they don't have any roots yet grown into deep into the dirt, and they go and tell all their friends what they're excited about, and they get mocked and picked on and ridiculed and laughed at and told they're going to hell or whatever, and so they quit. But if you are accepting his words and holding on tight and clinging to these things, what are the odds of them convincing you? 0. What are the odds of you convincing them? The same, 0. All right, so it's a waste of time. You have to learn to not do things that are a waste of time. Do something else. All right, next question.
All right, from Brian Bain, Proverbs 4:13, saying discipline is life. Yeshua is the life. Therefore, can we say Yeshua is discipline as well?
Yes, from the point of view is that Yeshua shows us what discipline looks like. Because he said, I only do what my Father says to do. I only say what he tells me to say. That takes discipline. To lay down his life for all of us, discipline. To be willing to go and take of the cup, discipline. And he had his moment where he said, Abba, if there's any other way to do this, I'm open. But nevertheless, your will be done. That wasn't a weak moment. It was just a moment of saying, I'm in a flesh suit now, and I know what pain feels like, and I know what this is really going to be. I only had a concept of it before I put on the flesh suit. Now I know. I've stubbed my toe. I was a carpenter. I probably hit my thumb a few times with a hammer. I know what pain is all about. And it's nothing compared to what he knew was coming. But he had the discipline to say, nevertheless, your will be done. We're going to do what you want to do no matter what it is. And once he went forward, there wasn't a flinch or a hesitation. Matter of fact, he stopped Peter from getting in the way of it. He stopped others and said, hey, I could call a legion of angels, but I'm not, this has to go the way it has to go. He even said to Judas, hey, Judas, do what you got to do. He was fully embracing what he knew was going to happen and how it needed to play out. That's discipline. Okay? Next.
From Daisy Freiberger, in Proverbs 2:16, is the woman referred to a false church? Because the Bible often refers to the church as a woman.
Well, here he's specifically talking to the idea that ideas and concepts like a woman could be tempting to a boy, to a man. All right? So he's using language and picturing, developing a metaphor, a picture that a young man could understand the temptation of a beautiful woman, the allure of the woman. Okay, remember he's talking to a man. He's saying, my son, and now it's not my son, the 10-year-old. He's like, my son, you're a man. I'm trying to pass on my knowledge and wisdom to you, my young man. Do not be tempted by these things, because they will be tempting as you might be tempted by a beautiful woman. Where she looks beautiful, but she may or may not be beautiful inside, but she's beautiful on the outside. It looks tempting. It looks desirable. It looks like something you would want. And so that's the metaphor here. It's not so much a church thing like, the mother of harlots and all that other stuff in Revelation. We're talking about here the ideas or the concepts that might allure you to, hey, this looks like truth. This looks like it's good. This looks like it'll bring me what I want. This will get me where I want to go, but it won't. Okay, so that's the metaphor here. Be careful of the temptation and the allure of these things like you would as a young man being tempted by a beautiful woman. By the way, let's take that metaphor further. If you're a married man, like a covenanted person, you must protect yourself from the beautiful woman that walks in. Not that there's anything evil or wrong with her, but you do not need to be dwelling your eyes on her or thinking about her and meditating on her. You need to be not avoiding like making her feel like she's got the plague, but you don't need to be going and spending your time with her because you're a married man. You already have a commitment. Same thing with a covenanted person. You don't need to be spending time with teachings that are not part of covenant and teachers not part of covenant and other ideas that are against or an allure away from your covenant. Something that could tempt you to break your covenant, like a beautiful woman might tempt a man to break covenant. You understand? Okay? It's the same metaphor. But yet we have no problem saying, I have people telling me, well, I still go to my Sunday church and I come to Saturday and everything. Well, why? That's like a man still dating his ex-girlfriend and his wife. Well, why would you do that? Okay? Because you're mixing stuff you need to separate those things. And you need to not be dwelling with that which can tempt you to break something. In a marriage, it could be a good-looking man or a good-looking woman, whichever one of the spouses, right, could be tempted. In a covenanting, it could be an idea or a teaching that could try to pull you in a direction that's not correct. And you need to guard yourself. So, the Jews talk about the idea of guarding the eyes. That the men are to guard their eyes and not be looking at that which they shouldn't be looking at because it could tempt them from after seeing it to want to do something with what they're looking at. Guess what? Ideas are the same way. So why are we watching teachings and watching stuff that could potentially lure us off the path? Just like hanging out with. I've had to tell more men than I'd like to count. Not a huge number, but way more than I'd like to count. I've had to tell them, you have no business being friends with, like close friends with, as a married man with a woman. I don't care if you were really good friends with a bunch of women before you got married, but you're married now. Ladies, same thing. You can't be all buddy-buddy with a bunch of guys now that you're married. But I cherish and value those friendships. I understand you do, but they could be tempting and problematic and everything else. You have to be guarding your deal. Well, that's the same thing when it comes to ideas, thoughts, teachings that could end up messing with your walk. Are you guarding after, or are you just popping on YouTube and watching everything and anything that pops up without any discernment of whether or not you potentially are going to get confused? And I know you are getting that, because a lot of you will eventually call me up because you're already confused and screwed up and you don't know what to do now. And I go, how did you get all screwed up? Because I watched a bunch of teachings. Okay, good. That's your problem. Now you want me to, my favorite one is when people will watch a teaching and then want me to explain what the other person was talking about. Call him up. I don't know what he's talking about. You want me to explain that person's teaching? I'll explain mine. Ask me to explain. I'm all confused. What are you confused about? Well, I was watching this teaching. I was hoping you can help me understand it. Was it my teaching? No. Well, whose teaching was it? Well, call him up. Anyway, all right. Where are we with this? Okay, next question. Okay, in the back, Rabbi Tom.
Thank you. In support of what you just said, I was looking at Proverbs 5, and it says, I have not heeded the voice of my teachers and have not inclined my ear to those who instructed me. And of course, this is why they hate discipline. And then in verse 15, it says, drink water from your own cistern and running water from your own well. And this can apply to things like YouTube teachings. There are other cisterns and other wells.
Well, look, I don't want to tell people they can't listen to
no,
other stuff, but I mean, it's a matter of, are you listening to occasional thing here or there because you're trying to understand something, or are you starting to suckle at the other teaching system or whatever? I mean, just got to be aware of what you're doing and how it's affecting you. Because I know a lot of you all have friends. I mean, probably if I ask hands, you know at least one person that after going from Christianity into this, ended up going from this into Judaism. Yes or no? Guess how that happened? Teachings they were watching that they didn't know how to handle properly. And so I had a person who that journey was exactly that, used to be part of the congregation, said to me, what do you think of my, I want to go deeper. Oh, that's always, the question that gets everybody in trouble. I want to go deeper. I found a yeshiva online, it's a Jewish yeshiva online that I can go to. I said, you can do whatever you want. I said, but you do understand that if you do this, there's a good possibility that you're going to end up doing this. Oh, no, I won't ever do that. I'm grounded and strong. And guess where he is now? Judaism. Well, apparently I didn't know what I was talking about, did I? Well, of course I did. I've seen it happen enough. But I didn't tell him he couldn't do it. I told him what would happen, though. I said, if you do it, this is likely what's going to happen. Oh, no. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody that does what he did will end up there, but it's a good possibility. Why do you want to tempt yourself into that? Just you got to be careful. You got to have counsel. Otherwise, yes, you can end up in all kinds of confusion and mess. You could be like the unstable that have changed their calendar 15 times. And I know many people like that. Am I mocking them? No. I'm just saying is that you can go online and find enough of this that you could change your mind, because each one sounds like they know exactly what they're talking about. So each one will convince you, and you'll change your mind and think everybody else is wrong, and then change your mind and think everybody's wrong. I watched a guy who had a fairly prominent ministry absolutely attack all of the lunar Sabbath guys only to become one himself. Then he became an Enochian calendar guy and attacked the lunar Sabbath guys again. Then I don't even know what he's doing now, but he's like every 2 or 3 years he changes calendars. There's no stability in this. Okay? Now, I don't mean stability meaning you should have stayed in the first church you ever went to, but change with the understanding that you are changing openly, overtly wrong things, not because you're chasing after the newest flavor, what looks like it might be right. Do you understand the difference? There's a difference between leaving the church realizing it's wrong, than going from calendar to calendar to calendar or whatever other thing you're doing because the latest thing looks like it's more accurate than the latest thing looks like it's more accurate. There's a reason I did that teaching on making the calendar decision. Not as simple as you might think it would be. Okay? And I had some people show me another one recently, and I studied it out, and I pointed out to them why I didn't think it was as simple as they thought it was. It's not an easy thing. But you need to then be able to say, I need to have somebody make a decision, which is what that teaching was about, and then let's walk that decision. Okay, next question. Okay, Deirdre?
So if you will allow me to go back a second, Rabbi, you made a comment, you're talking about how in Judaism there was this idea of, the men guarding their eyes. The thought popped in my head that many different cultures, I guess a lot of the Middle Eastern cultures especially, they had this idea of covering, and especially for the women, they cover pretty much everything. You see that a lot in the Islamic community. So how can we as women who are Torah observant, I'm trying to figure out how to word it without sounding obvious.
I'll answer your question. All right, let me answer your question. Okay.
I'm trying to beside the obvious, things, appropriate dress code,
No, look,
what can we do?
There's two things, okay. First of all, you have to realize that this takes two, okay? Ladies, because I already started off with the guys. Guys, you need to watch your eyes. You need to guard your eyes. You don't need to be looking where you don't need to be looking. And you know where that is. And you don't need to be doing that. And even if it's not like an exposed part of the skin that shouldn't be exposed or whatever, you shouldn't be just looking at someone, not your wife, looking just to stare, oh, wow, man, she's cute and she's this. But that's not, if you're married, you don't need to be thinking that about anybody. You don't need to be looking at anybody, whether they're covered up as much as they're covered up and nothing is, quote unquote, inappropriate in their clothing. You just don't need to be looking like that. Okay? It's like I heard one guy one time tell this story about how it's one thing as a guy, because you're a guy, and like I'll use the example, you're driving down the street, you stop at the red light, you look over and there's a beautiful woman on the corner in a beautiful dress and she looks great, and you notice her. You're a guy, you'll notice. Now, but if you drive around the block 4 times, now you got a problem. Okay? So there's nothing wrong with that you noticed. But then you should be aware that you noticed and decide, I'm not going to continue to look over where I noticed. Okay, that's on the guys. Ladies, okay, I'm not saying that you need to hide your beauty, but let's not draw men's attention to the parts of your body that they don't need to be looking at. All right? And so keep those parts covered. Okay, you can still wear beautiful outfits. You can still fix your hair and everything to look beautiful, and you should, because there are probably still people out there, especially if you're single, that you might want to look beautiful for, including yourself. So that's why I said it's only half on you. The guys need to just get their heads right and their eyes right. Okay? So for modesty's sake, let's just cover up what needs to be covered up. We don't need to see a lot of cleavage and a whole lot of leg. Let's keep it simple. Okay? But we do still want you to feel like you can dress in a way that makes you look beautiful. And we can appreciate that you look beautiful, all of you. The other side of that being, though, that the guys need to know how much attention that should have for them, especially if they're married. Okay? And so that's kind of the two parts of that. Did that answer the question?
Yes, I guess what I was trying to formulate, and I couldn't because I guess I was embarrassed. I don't know. But I was trying to formulate, how can we as women make it easier on the men since we know that they have that tendency.
What you don't have to turn into wearing a burqa, okay?
Right.
We don't have to put you in a sack and hide every bit of you. All right? I mean, the ladies here look fabulous. Okay? And a lot of you dress up for Shabbat and you just look fantastic, and that's great. The rest of it's on the guys, though, because I don't think we hardly ever have anybody in here dressed inappropriately as far as showing too much of whatever. Rarely that happens, but not much. But that's only half the problem. Even if that is happening, a guy should immediately notice and go, oh, and then go, oh, okay. Okay? They notice, but then they should notice that they noticed and then not have to be looking in that direction anymore. It's on the guys. Okay, guys, get your thoughts in order. Take those thoughts into captivity. Because your eyes, once you say, I do, what you're saying is, I do have only my thoughts for you. That's where your thoughts are. And that's, now as a guy, you will still notice, and ladies, don't get mad at them if a beautiful woman happens to walk by and they notice them for a second, and then they turn around again, and all they did was notice them for a second. Don't punch them or beat them up. Now, if they're looking at her and following every move that she's making and everything else, yes, give them a kick or some other thing. Okay, but if he notices, it means he's still a man. Okay, so don't be upset about that. Okay, you notice a good-looking guy walking down too. But it's a matter of observing and seeing, okay, he noticed her because you noticed her. You probably noticed her first. Women tend to notice it before the men do. But then when he notices her, if he notices and then that's it, then don't worry about it. That's normal. Okay? But if he can't take his eyes off her, now we got a different problem. Okay? The only one he should not be able to take his eyes off of is you. And that's the way this should work. Okay? Now, this is not easy. We are flesh and blood as well, and we fight against flesh and blood. And so, but ladies, your part is simply to not cause the problem by drawing undue attention to parts of your body that don't need to be having undue attention. Okay? And it doesn't need any more explanation than that. Societally, this changes over the years and this and that and the other thing. Look, my wife was given a lot of grief in our very first congregation because we had a bunch of ladies that only believed that if your skirt had to be almost touching the floor, you were sinning. And now my wife was not wearing short skirts, okay? But hers didn't actually go all the way to the floor. And so I asked her to not cause any more problems in the congregation. I didn't want to fight with these ladies to go ahead and get those skirts longer, just as a way to be loving to my brother or sisters who, even though I thought they were a little over the top on what was going on, okay? And so that's also part of being giving and generous to your brothers and sisters. Well, I don't think I need to just because well, you know what? Why, if it's not going to hurt you, why not do something that would make your brother happier? If it doesn't hurt you to do it. And she didn't want to do it either. I'm not saying it. It's just, I said, please just do it. And she did it for me. See, that was a good submission there. Because why cause a brother to have a problem if you can avoid it? All right? Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Now, I want to say something else because this did happen once, and this should never happen, okay? If we have a young lady walk into this building, or maybe if she's not so young, it doesn't matter, and she's dressed not the way we just discussed, what we need to do is not freak out. This happened once. I think there was a teenage girl, probably around 15, 16, walked in, cleavage showing everywhere, skirt up to her butt, and I didn't see this, okay? Because as soon as she walked in, the ladies jumped on her and threw blankets on her, did whatever. They literally embarrassed the life out of this poor girl. I heard about this, okay? I did not see any of it. But that should never happen. The woman should be taken aside, especially in this case, a young girl should have been with her mother and said, look, you just need to know that it would be better if this was dealt with differently in the future. We could survive one person dressed scantily one time. You can deal with it. Okay? And then allow the leadership to properly talk to whoever needs to be spoken to. If it's an adult woman, we could talk to her directly. If it's a younger one who's there with family, we could talk to parents, whatever. Let that go that way. Don't panic. Don't freak out. Don't, okay? We could all live with one person, one time, dressed whatever. Because how horrifying was it for that poor girl? She wasn't expecting that reaction, didn't think she was doing anything inappropriate. Wasn't her fault that she was voluptuous as a young teenager, but her mother didn't think ahead. But I was mortified to hear how the reaction was. You know, as the rabbi and the group leader, I was like, we should not be doing that. I mean, you can quietly ask her off to the side, maybe offer a sweater or something. There's things you can do that are not going to embarrass the poor girl to death. Okay? Because this can happen. You know, people can walk in here who they don't know what's right. I mean, look, have you been to some of the churches where they look like they're going out from church straight to the nightclub? Right? There are churches like that. And I haven't been to any of them, but people tell me, hey, you got to see the way they dress to some of these churches. Okay, well, we should be able to handle almost anything that walks in that door in a way that does not attack or embarrass the person. Okay? Okay. None of the people in this building, wives, ladies, your men are not going to have their walk completely destroyed because somebody walked in here dressed like that. Now, they may have to deal with some of the things that they were thinking in their head, but it won't destroy their walk because one day, one time, one service, somebody walked in. Okay? So let's not overreact to things. Okay, we don't have to become covered from head to toe in like a burqa. Because what that does is it totally takes away the man's responsibility to guard his eyes. All right? So men in the very male-dominated society, like in Islam, rather than have to deal with their emotional challenges, they put the women in a sack and cover them from head to toe so that there's no temptation. But see, Yahweh wants to allow us to have temptation to see how we deal with it. How will he know how you're going to deal with temptation? Why do you think Hasatan gets released at the end of the 1,000 years? There has to be temptation so that we can show that we can overcome temptation. And so, guys, be aware of what you're looking at and how long you're looking at it. Where's your attention? Who is it on and how much are you giving? That's on you. And if you think for a second your wife hasn't noticed, you're wrong. She has noticed almost to the second how long you were focusing on the wrong person. She got a stop clock in her head that's ticking. Sounds very much like a time bomb. Very similar. Tick, 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 tick. And it's going to blow up in your face. Okay. Just FYI. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Is that it? All right. Wait, go to live stream. Wait, there's more back there.
From Mark Holland, says, just like it says in Psalm 119, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light for my path. Could this also mean if we stay in the light of Yah, we can keep from the path of darkness?
Sure.
All right. From Yanni.
I mean, wait, when I say sure, that what you said is true. I don't think they're linked necessarily. I mean, the light lights the path, doesn't mean you have to follow that. But if you do follow it, then you stay in. So what you said is true. But just because the word is a light doesn't mean that you actually go that direction. You can still choose to go any way you want. Okay? But yes, the light lights the path, and if you stay on the path, you will not end up in the darkness. So that is true.
From Yanni, says MTY, it says Proverbs 2, verse 1, accept my words, listen to the teacher and trust him. The right teacher of Yahweh is John 17, verses 17 and 18, a teacher you can trust. Then accept the words and walk the Torah with your teacher.
Yes. I'll agree with that.
Okay, from Greg Wallen, Proverbs 2, verses 9 says, every good path. Is there more than one good path? Are there possibly many aspects to the light or simple path?
We talked about this indirectly already. Everybody's on their own path. We don't understand that every path, if it eventually leads to the kingdom, is a good path. Some of you have been down some pretty horrible paths, that are very different than somebody else's very horrible path. But ultimately it brought you to this point, which means it was ultimately a good path. Okay? So when he's talking about here, he says, then you would understand righteousness, right ruling, and straightness in every good path. If you would watch over these things, you would recognize things like all things work for the good. You would recognize emunah as being all things are either caused or allowed. But not every path looks exactly the same. Even though everybody, every one of you who's keeping Shabbat, your path looks a little different than everybody else in this room. Your journey's a little different in terms of your family relationships, your job relationships, your choices that have you down different things. You're dealing with health issues, whatever. But if you are watching over the paths of right ruling, and by the way, paths of right ruling also have to do with the different aspects of right ruling. There's how you treat each other, how you treat your Creator, how you deal with business, how you deal with food, these are all paths of righteousness. But if you focus on Him, then you would understand righteousness, right ruling, and every good path. Not that there's different paths the way you were kind of wording it in the question. Hopefully that makes sense. Think of paths as aspects of, as opposed to a different path. Aspects of the path. The path to health, the path to good relationships, the path to the way your relationship with your Creator, the path to the relationship with people who are human beings, the path to a good marriage, the path to good parenting. They're all part of the same Torah path.
That's it.
Oh, you made all that big deal for that? No, I'm kidding. We had a couple of them, which is good. All right, let's get the children.